So over the last few years in powerlifting, we've talked a ton about how high frequency training is incredibly beneficial. You see lifters like Agatashitko doing 6 times SBD and being the best lifter in the world. So you want to ask yourself, should everyone be chasing or having a high frequency program? And there's tons of benefits with high frequency programming, right? Most of it boils down to, obviously you're gonna have increased skill practice. You're gonna be able to practice doing the movement more frequently. You're gonna be able to accumulate more stimulus, because again, if you lift, if you squat 3 times a week, 4 times a week, you're gonna be able to accumulate a lot of tonnage and load and work capacity, which ultimately is going to push. So with all being said, if you're gonna have increased stimulus, more opportunities to practice your skill, why shouldn't everyone do 5 times SBD? And I think this whole idea of high frequency kind of boils down to a few things, right? It boils down to you have to ask your client, how often can they train? Can they actually fit in 5 squat workouts a week? Do they even need to, right? The way I approach a lot of frequency-based stuff is it's relative to what the lifter was doing prior, right? So for example, let's just take squat for example. If I'm squatting twice a week and we're hitting tons of progress, making gains, just because we can add a 3rd squat day doesn't necessarily mean we need to. It's only when we notice that maybe on 2 squat days we're noticing we're not getting that progression we're looking for, we're hitting a plateau, then we could look towards, obviously look at accessories like belt squat, hack squat to push that leg development, figuring out what is the bottleneck. Maybe it is capacity is the bottleneck, and then therefore if we add in a 3rd squat day, maybe that will yield that progress we're looking for. And in this example, I kind of want to go over the application of what that would look like. So in the example here, I'll talk about when we go from 2 squat days to 3 squat days, if we think that 2 squat days isn't enough to make progress, this is what it would look like. A common mistake lifters all the time make is they essentially approach frequency in terms of they'll add in a 3rd day and they'll add in a bunch of volume, so the total amount of workload increases 30%, and usually that leads to overtraining, they get injured, they get banged up, don't feel good. The first step with frequency and how to actually make improvements is you keep the same workload, the same volume, you just distribute the stress. So to keep it simple, if you're doing 8 sets of squats per week right now on 2 squat days, right? How we would organize a 3 times squat cycle, so if you squat 3 days a week, you'll do 3 working sets 3 times a week, so 9 total sets. So yes, you'll be doing a little bit more volume, but generally speaking, the sessions will be overall less tonnage per session, less volume per session. And the other common issue people realize is that oftentimes when you initially increase frequency, you're gonna have to drop the intensity. Because again, if we keep this high intensity or average intensity stays the same across 3 days, you're probably not gonna recover. So once you apply this change, right, you're squatting 3 days a week, you do 3 squat working sets per week, you kind of find the variations you're able to accomplish. What is the next step? Okay, well, we address are they making progress on just redistributing load throughout the week? And if they aren't, and your lifter still is requiring more work, then obviously I would go right to the accessories first, push those accessories. If those also don't lead to change, then obviously we can move on to the next needle, which is essentially the idea of increasing maybe its intensity, volume, or kind of pushing a bit more capacity in general. I think a lot of people, when they increase frequency, they just forget about all these little needles or things to move the needle in terms of they'll just arbitrarily add a ton more volume, they'll arbitrarily put in more work and realize that they're just leading their lifter to feeling fatigued, run down, and probably, And when we think about increasing this frequency, again, we have to factor in what does the lifter's life look like. With my own coaching, I coach obviously a variety of lifters, right? And if I coach, I don't know, a dad who has kids, I'm not gonna ask him, yo man, can you squat 3 days a week? Or, oh, can you be in the gym 6 days a week to get this frequency? That just doesn't make sense, right? So you have to ask yourself from a practicality standpoint, what is the goal of the client? What can they realistically do? What can they accomplish? What's feasible for that lifter? And ultimately, you have to take in that theory with the practical, put it together to come up with a solution. And then finally, do you actually need to have increase in frequency? Let's determine why are you doing it? How are you approaching it? What is the reason, right? So in this case, when I'm coaching a lifter, again, I'm looking at Are they currently progressing? No, they're not progressing. Well, why aren't they progressing? Are we looking at their outside life? Are we looking at within program? Are we looking at even just the distribution of the microcycle? So let's just say theoretically we have primary squat on Monday and secondary squat on Thursday, and we notice that the primary deadlift on Wednesday is impacting some primary squat, or just that general, like looking at the sequencing of lifts is the first thing. So frequency and adding it is usually the last resort, or the last thing you want to think of, because you want to think of like changing the least you need to in order to get that lifter to make progress. So again, in today's age, we all think high frequency, that's the key, that's what we need to do. It's not always the case. It's the last lever we tend to want to push with regards to that training. So I want to wrap this up with a good case study. So an example of this, and I'll keep it pretty brief, is with a lifter of mine. He's actually a super heavyweight, which I find is an interesting kind of case study. So my client Chris, for his entire nationals prep, we'd pull once a week on deadlifts, right? And overall, we just didn't have a great deadlift prep. We just noticed his capacity was pretty low for pulls. He was only doing, I think, 3 sets per week of deadlifts, and just deadlifts weren't clicking that well. Squats and bench were clicking okay, but again, deadlifts were just a huge lack for him in terms of training. So post-competition, what we did is we actually, instead, because he had this like work capacity issue, it was like, what if we just hit a similar amount of volume and just distribute the stress differently? So we went to 2 pulls per week. And at first he was kind of like, oh damn, like dude, I could barely like go do 1 pull per week, never mind like 2. So what we did is like on one of the days, we'd literally program 2 sets of pulls, literally 2 sets, RP 5, 6, I believe. And on the other day we would do like alternating heavy. So again, we're just messing around with the intensity. We're adding frequency, but again, I think a lot of lifters and a lot of coaches think frequency means having to do a meaningful amount of work. You could deadlift 3 days a week and like the one deadlift day as a top set and that's it. And then you just go do the rest of your stuff, right? We have to look at like total stress. So for Chris, again, like the one day he did 2 sets of deadlifts, very light work. And then the other day he would do another 2 sets of deadlifts. So over the course of the week, he'd only do 4 sets of deadlifts. That was 1 set more than before. But by distributing that stress, he was able to just recover session to session. And maybe during those workouts, he didn't feel like he was like training. But the reality is like the total workload is what matters. And it doesn't matter if you feel like you have a pump or you feel like you've worked really hard. It's about what you do over the course of that period of time. And again, within 6 to 8 weeks, I got him hitting a new 3RM, which again, typically post-competition for a super, it's quite difficult to do, right? So just shows that, again, frequency, like it is a great tool, but it's about knowing how to apply that tool for the right athlete. So overall, to kind of summarize this video, the biggest thing and the biggest helpers for frequency to determine is if you even need it, and typically you might need it if, again, you're looking for skill practice, you're looking to increase work capacity, you're plateaued, but you're plateaued because you feel fresh all the time and you feel like you can accumulate more workload, that's a great idea. But there are so many other levers we can pull before we go into frequency. So with that being said, approach your accessories, look at the way you structure your microcycle, look at just how you organize your training, and if you've looked at all those things, the external variables outside the gym, and you have that real conversation with your client being like, hey, like I can actually handle another squat day because my schedule allows for it, and you think there's a good reason for it, then yeah, it's actually a great tool to use. But again, when you implement that frequency, implement it properly. Equal stress throughout the week, let the lifter adapt to that new stress. Once they've adapted to it, that's when you can slowly increase that volume, and then suddenly you have a 30% increase in volume over time, like later, and that leads to more gains. But if you initially do that right away, that's a recipe for disaster. So hopefully you guys like this YouTube video. If you have any questions, just leave comments down below. I can do more videos on this as well. Again, I'm gonna try to post 2 videos per month on this, trying to keep them in that like 10-minute mark. So hopefully you guys enjoy it, and hopefully you have a wonderful day.